Mankind is now storming its last two frontiers, deep space and the deep ocean. To explore these two places, we certainly need the knowledge of how the human body reacts or behaves in an airless space. How long can a human stay submerged underwater without surfacing? How long is it possible to hold our breath? Is it possible for a man to become an amphibian? People have had dreams of having the ability to breathe underwater since ancient times. This ability has been mentioned in numerous fairy tales, novels, poems, even movies. The 90s movies by James Cameron, The Abyss, featured a liquid that people could breathe in, among other wonders. However, only a few people are aware that the basis of the miracle is rather scientific. Liquid breathing, or liquid ventilation, involves filling the lungs with a liquid saturated with dissolved oxygen, which enters the bloodstream. Under special conditions, mammals can respire underwater for a long time. This conclusion was made by Dr. Joannes Calstra of Leiden University, Holland. As it turned out, back in 1962, Dr. Calstra and several other colleagues were the first to conduct a series of experiments on liquid breathing. He had immersed mice in a particular solution that was saturated with oxygen under the pressure of 160 atmospheres. The rodents remained alive for 18 hours, but they died upon returning to land, as they couldn't get rid of the fluid in their lungs. Later, Dr. Calstra moved on to experimenting with dogs. 6 dogs remained underwater with oxygen supply under the pressure of 5 atmospheres for 23 to 28 minutes. After the dogs were brought to the surface, expelling the remaining water in the lungs took many hours and disrupted the usual gaseous exchange process. In 1966, Leland Clark and Frank Golland conducted an experiment using mice and cats. They got to a point where the animals survived for weeks after breathing in a fluorocarbon liquid that could hold significantly more oxygen than water. However, in the long run, they all suffered lung damage. In 1977, Calstra conducted the first experiment on humans. 49-year-old Frank Felajak was an underwater photography diver fond of skydiving. He got saline poured into one of his lungs. It was warmed up to match his body temperature, and the reaction of his lungs to the flow of fluid in the process of gas exchange were monitored. In subsequent experiments, Frank's lungs were simultaneously filled with saline. He got through the experiment safely, although he developed pneumonia later on. Later in 1977, Calstra submitted a report to the U.S. Navy Department. According to his calculations, he wrote that a healthy person could receive the required amount of oxygen using fluorocarbons and hydrocarbons. All hydrogen atoms are replaced with fluorine atoms that are good at digesting oxygen and carbon dioxide. The scientist explicitly said this ability could open new perspectives for rescuing submariners from great depths. In practice, the technique of liquid breathing, which was already known as liquid ventilation of the lungs by that time, was applied in humans only once in 1989. Thomas Schaefer, a pediatrician at Temple University, USA, and his colleagues used this method to save premature babies. Unfortunately, liquid ventilation did not save those babies. Nevertheless, this sad fact was attributed to other reasons and not the imperfection of the method. In the 1990s, researchers modified the method and performed the procedure on patients with chronic inflammatory lung disease. They experimented with partial liquid ventilation, in which the lungs were completely filled with fluid. The initial results looked promising, but ultimately, this method was never adopted in clinical use because it was discovered that conventional ventilation of the lungs with air worked just as well. People have been trying to stay underwater for a long time since ancient times. The Greeks and Romans used diving bells for air supply or breathing through a leather tube similar to an elephant's trunk. The principle of operation of the diving bell was based on the laws of physics, which explained that an inverted object put underwater would have air left under it, thus allowing the person to continue breathing. The very named bell was used because this underwater container was often cone-shaped. This device was the most stable when submerged, and the water entering from below was relatively low. Naturally, it was far from professional diving, but the apparatus was built based on curiosity rather than practical use. A man could only dive for 1 to 1.5 meters with the device and could not really do anything. If you held your breath right now, you would stop breathing for no more than a minute, and then it would become almost unbearable. How about 24 minutes without air? this time without diving bells or liquid breathing. A diver set a record in Croatia by holding his breath underwater for 24 minutes and 11 seconds. This is due to a phenomenon where a free diver holds his breath near the surface of the water. This is known as static apnea. Most of the record holders for static apnea have a natural disposition to it. For example, an average person has a lung capacity of 4 to 6 liters, while divers have a lung capacity of 10 liters. Moreover, they tend to have a slow metabolism, but still, some tricks can help. For example, athletes make a series of exhalations to breathe out carbon dioxide before diving. Second, records are set with the help of the so-called lung packing technique. Divers use throat and tongue muscles to pack in more air than the resting lung capacity can hold. It is said that this technique allows the diver to hold at least 3 extra liters of air. Finally, the main trick is to breathe in pure oxygen. 24 minutes without a single breath is certainly impressive. However, the achievement of the Bajau ethnic group living in Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines is no less impressive. They can move freely across the vast Indian Ocean. Their main occupation is fishing. They go ashore only for funerals, sell their catch, get fresh water, or repair their boats. For these people, the sea is everything. It's their home, work, life, and entertainment. The Bajau people learned how to hunt underwater and dive to great depths from early childhood. Thus, the representatives of this tribe are excellent free divers who can easily dive without scuba gear to an astonishing depth of 30 meters and can stay underwater for 10 to 15 minutes. If there is an amphibian man title, this tribe is definitely worthy of it. The Bajau people often have damaged eardrums that had either ruptured naturally because of the pressure drop underwater or punctured on purpose to not feel pain in moments of deep and sudden dives. In addition to this hearing disability, they frequently have to pay with their own lives for their fishing activity. Decompression sickness is an eternal companion of divers. It is a situation where air and blood vessels are turned into bubbles, resulting in death. Let's pretend for a while that humans can breathe underwater. Thanks to human lungs, whose evolution is not intended for underwater breathing, it might seem unreal. However, let's imagine it for a second. Cool, right? It would bring mankind some advantages, without a doubt. For example, underwater archaeology, the ability to study the world's oceans and their denizens without fear of drowning, and other benefits that would come with it. Would it really be so straightforward? We don't think so, and there are some reasons for that. First, humans have to endure immense pressure underwater, and water is about 800 times denser than air. The pressure increases by 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of depth. If the diver resurfaces quickly, the gases that have dissolved in their blood begin to boil, forming the bubbles that cause decompression sickness, which is deadly. Secondly, due to the extremely high density of water, divers find themselves in conditions similar to the state of weightlessness, which of course complicates any movements or activities. Also, water resistance has a noticeable effect on the swimming speed. Third, the orientation when underwater can pose certain difficulties. A person moves around by relying on his sight on land, and body balance is maintained with the vestibular apparatus. However, the diver does not have the usual firm ground under their feet when swimming underwater. Under these conditions, the vestibular apparatus is the remaining sense organ that the diver has to rely on, since the forces of gravity still continue to work on it. Fourth, the body's cooling in water is much more intense than in the air. The human body begins to cool too fast if it's in water for a long time, with a temperature below 33 degrees. Fifth, hearing worsens underwater, since sounds underwater are perceived by bone conduction, which is 40% lower than air conduction. Sixth, vision underwater has its own characteristics. If a swimmer dives without a mask, light rays pass through the water and directly enter the eye with little refraction. As a result, visibility is reduced underwater by 100 to 200 times, and if the field of vision decreases, the image of objects become unclear and blurry.